Well, this morning I was in study and I'm reading the book of Matthew through, and this little passage just stood out to me. And I began to see some things about it, and God began to share some things with me and lay them on my heart. So I thought, okay, so I wrote it all out in my journal, like 3 or 4 pages, right? And then I thought, I just really need to make a little video about it. Now, hopefully, it won't go long because I've got an appointment in 30 minutes. So hopefully, this won't go too long. But I hope to encourage you today, especially if you're in any kind of ministry. But it's not just, the word's not just for ministers. It's just that we take that bread, as we're going to see in the story, and we let God break it and bless it, and then we pass it out to others, and He accomplishes the goals, right? And so I'm in Matthew 14, and I know you've read it a million times. If you've read the Bible through with a Bible reading program, or you've been in ministry in any type of length of time, or if you've just been to church any amount of time, you've heard the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. Well, Jesus didn't really feed the 5,000. The disciples did, because Jesus blessed what they were doing, right? Or they got with what Jesus was blessing. Either way you want to say it. So I'm looking at this story, and John was just beheaded, so we could go off on the grief there, because Jesus had some grief. It said when he heard about John the Baptist dying, then he departed from there by boat to go off to a deserted place by himself. But the problem was the multitudes followed him. He couldn't get away from them, and he didn't necessarily want to, but sometimes he needed that solitude. He needed that prayer. He needed that time, just like we do, right? Because at that point, he was fully God, but fully man. And his body needed to rest. His emotions needed to rest. He always went back to who he was and who the Father was. But in between, he was human like us, right? And so he goes away, and then it says when Jesus came out from the solitude, the moment of solitude that he had, maybe 5 minutes, who knows how long he had, right? There was a great multitude waiting for him. And it says he saw them, and he was just moved with compassion. And so he came from this place of what we could probably correctly apply as grief, to a degree, after John the Baptist, his cousin, was killed, right? And he comes right out, and he's immediately moved with compassion, and he begins to just heal people. We need to take those instances in life and turn them into ministry opportunities, right? Our grief can become the catapult, the catalyst, the element of change, to where now we have compassion on people. It should not drive us to ourselves to stay forever. Do we need those moments of solitude? Absolutely. But that's not the end all. When we come out of that, when we've been with God, when he's healed us, when we've given it to him, then we come out, and we should be moved with compassion toward others. Not just so much today we get lost in our own pain. And I have to say right now, I'm guilty. I am learning to work through some old emotions that I should have worked through a long time ago. I didn't even know that I had them, right? And yet, if we're not careful, we will get so absorbed up into our own pain and our own emotions that we can't have compassion on others. But God's calling us out of that place. We got to have compassion on others. That's what Jesus did. And we're supposed to, 1 John 2:6, if we're going to follow him, we got to walk just like he did. Take that moment of solitude, take that time to heal, and then come out and be moved with compassion and reach out and pour out to the people. So he's poured out to the people, and then his disciples came to him and said, hey, we are really a long ways away. I don't know why they didn't know that already, right? He said, we're in a deserted place. God can move in the deserted place. Oh my gosh, God moves in deserted places. We're going to talk about Moses in a minute. God moved with Moses in the backside of the wilderness, hiding from people. He was living in solitude, yet God met him in that deserted place. God can use deserted places, right? And even though they were in a deserted place, it says they're deserted, but there's like 5,000 people there, right? So they weren't all alone, but sometimes you can feel all alone in a crowd too. The disciples came to him and said, hey, we are really a long ways from everywhere. We're in the middle of nowhere, and it's getting late. And here's what their solution was: send the multitude away. Send them away. And don't we sometimes want to send people away because we don't know how to meet their needs? It's okay because we are not the one meeting their needs. God is. God is the one meeting their needs, as we're going to see here in just a minute. But the disciples, now we're going to see also in a minute that they've already tried to figure this out on their own and they missed the mark, right? But they're like, send the multitude away so that they can go get some food for themselves. That is not the job of ministry, you guys. Now, should we be able to feed ourselves? Yes. And the point of ministry is to raise up people, teach them, help them grow so that they can take this word and go with God and he feeds them, right? Because even as a small child, the whole goal of we give them a bottle, we nurse them, we get them to a certain age, and then we start giving them finger foods, and we go, here, you feed yourself. And then we teach them how to use the utensils properly. They use a fork and a spoon and eventually a knife to learn how to feed themselves. Yes, but it's a process. But you don't send them away, set them over in the corner and go, figure out how to feed yourself or you're going to die, right? As ministers, our job is to teach them how to feed themselves. We don't send them away. If you are a pastor or of a church or even in leadership and your people don't know how to feed themselves, you have failed. If you are their only source, you have failed. God is the source. He will do it. But the answer is not to send them away and to keep feeding them. And sometimes in church bodies, we see people actually just incapacitated and made to rely on the minister. Now, a minister is supposed to teach people how to rely on God, not draw them to themselves and make them dependent on them. The whole goal of having children is growing them up into independent adults that can make decisions and take care of themselves, right? It's the same thing spiritually. We want to mature. This was Ephesians 4. So that we grow up into a body. We grow up so that we mature. That's the whole point. But their answer was send them away. And behind that was this, because we don't know what else to do with them, right? And so, but Jesus said, they do not need to go away. You feed them. You give them something to eat, right? It's like, whoa, don't ghost them. Don't ignore them. Don't send them away, right? Give them something to eat. You do it. And they said their answer to that tells me they had thought it through logically and not come up with a solution, because they said, well, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. So they had already thought about it. They had already maybe gone over to the side going, what are we going to do? Do we have anything to feed them? I don't know. Let's go find out what we've got. They had already done their survey. They had already counted the people. They had already looked at what they had and said, it's not enough. Jesus said, bring them to me, right? No matter how small what we have seems, when we bring it to him, he will use it. He will expand it. Because we can look at it and go, I don't have a big ministry. I'm not reaching a lot of people. You only have to reach one. What if you reach one Billy Graham? What if you reach one person who reaches another person, who reaches 2 people, who reaches 10, who reaches 100? You still had a part in that. It may look small to you, but that's because you're looking at it through your eyes and not his eyes. We got to bring to him whatever we have and let him expand it. Here's another example. In Exodus 4, God asked Moses, what do you have in your hand? What do you have in your hand? And that's kind of what Jesus said here. He said, don't send them away, give them something to eat. And they said, well, here's all we have is. How many times have I said that to God? Well, I don't really have anything. I'm kind of stuck here in this apartment. And yet I reach the world. I have ministry opportunities in Pakistan and in other places. And it's just like, God, when we give God what we have in our hand, he will expand it. He will multiply it. He will use it to feed thousands, right? And thousands is a small number these days, right? Anyway, he said, what do you have in your hand? And Moses said, well, all I got's a rod. I just got this shepherd's rod. I've been using it for years. I use it to climb on the hills. It's just a rod. It's just a big fat stick, right? And God said, throw it on the ground. Translated, drawing a parallel to this would be, give it to me. And what happened with that rod? Now, it became a snake. Moses ran, I'd have run. He picked it up. I don't know that I could have done that, right? But you got to do what you got to do, right? And what happened? Well, there was in Exodus 14, when he came to the Red Sea, he came there, and God actually said, "Why are you crying to me?" Let me find that. I want to find that because this is really good. Kind of Jesus was kind of treating the disciples that way too. In Exodus 14, Moses said, "Oh." He tells the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still. See the salvation of the Lord. He will accomplish it for you. For today, they are going to be gone." And then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying to me?" So his heart was going, "What are we going to do, God?" Even though he was assuring the people, "God's got this." It's not fake to do that as a minister. God's got that. I do a peace out devotional, and sometimes I don't have peace when I start. Hopefully, most days I have it when I finish, but I keep. So even though I'm saying peace out, my heart's going, "Whew, I hope I get this too." Right? It's not fake. It's not a facade. We are human. And as ministers, here Moses is telling people, God's going to show you a great deliverance today. And that God answers his heart saying, "Why are you crying to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward." What did Moses see? He saw the Red Sea, and yet he's got God saying, "Tell him to go forward." The disciples are going, "Oh, we got this little meal for maybe 2 people." And Jesus is saying, "You feed them." God's telling Moses, "You go forward." What we see is not what is the totality of what is there, right? When God touches it, when God uses that same rod to part the Red Sea, when Jesus blesses the 5 loaves and 2 fish, what we see isn't what the result is. The result is so much bigger than what we see when we give it to God. This really blessed me this morning. That's why I'm on here early this morning, right? But another thing about the rod was it's also what God used when he said, "Strike the rock with the rod." And what came out? Water. When Jesus was struck on the cross with 2 rods stuck together, right? When he was struck, living water came out. We have the Holy Spirit, the living water, when the rock was struck, because the rock was struck for us, right? So what looked like a little story in Exodus, they want to take Yul Brynner and make a great movie that they only show at Easter, right? And people watch it religiously in Easter. They've got to watch the 10 Commandments, but the movie was so much more. God took something little and expanded it and explained the kingdom of God, right? And so going back wasn't an option for them. For Moses, God didn't tell Moses, "Well, turn around." He said, "Why are you crying to me? Go forward." When the disciples came here in Matthew 14 and said, "We don't know what to do," he said, feed them, go forward. And so then it says Jesus blessed the food, and that meager amount of food was distributed and fed 3,000, right? 2,000? Hold on. 5,000. I can't read my own writing. Fit 5,000. He dispersed 5 loaves of fish, or five loaves of fish. Get that? It's live, right? 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and dispersed it among 5,000 people. And there was probably more, but there was at least 5,000, right? So if Jesus can, the parallel I want to draw is this. This was a prophetic statement. For those of you who have any experience in the prophetic, this was a prophetic statement. Jesus was the bread. Jesus was the bread that came down from heaven, right? He blessed this bread. He gave it to the disciples. When they broke it, it was distributed. This was a prophetic parallel to what's going to happen on Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost, right? Because in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost, Peter broke the bread and fed the people, right? And 3,000 got saved. So what they saw in the natural in Matthew 14 happened in the spiritual in Acts chapter 2. The Lord, and then it goes on to say in verse 47 of Acts chapter 2 that the Lord added to the church daily. The people didn't. The Lord did. The people didn't part the Red Sea. They just acted on what God did and walked across. When God told Moses, "Go forward," and they walked across on dry ground, right? And they acted on what God did and they saw a great deliverance. The disciples acted on what Jesus said. He blessed the food. He said, you feed them. They went forward instead of retreating. Their answer was, send them all away. We don't know what to do because we already we've exhausted all of our resources. And all we came up with was a couple of loaves of bread and a fish. It's not enough. So let's just send them away. That's never the answer, right? And it's not our answer today either. Maybe we don't know what to do. The world looks like it's falling apart. And as ministers, it's hard because we want to minister peace. We want to minister grace. We want to minister God's hope. And yet we see the same things the rest of the world sees. But the answer is not to turn back. The answer is to go forward. Go forward. Continue to break the word. Give what you have to God. He will bless it. If it looks like just a plain old stick you found on the back of the wilderness, he'll use it to deliver the people. If it's just a little bit of bread and a fish or two, he'll use it to feed the people. No matter how small it seems, if you give it to him, he will multiply it. He will use it, and he will use you to reach the masses. And so many things are so many things that we go through even now. Sometimes we get caught up in the physical aspect and forget that there is a spiritual parallel, right? God was showing Jesus was showing the disciples right there in the backside of the wilderness again, right? God has a way of meeting us in the wilderness, doesn't he? Met Moses, but Moses was hiding out from everybody except God. I knew where he was, right? The Jesus had tried to go away from everybody, and yet they followed him out there, right? And so they're on the backside of the wilderness, and yet here's this parallel. God's giving the disciples this natural parallel to what he's fixing to do with them. Fixing to is a real fancy term there, to do with them in the spirit realm. He's going to bless the bread. He's going to be broken, and then he's going to be dispersed. And when he blessed it, gave it to the disciples, and they dispersed it, they did it in the natural in Matthew 14. They did it in the spiritual in Acts chapter 2, and throughout the whole book of Acts. Jesus was the bread broken, right? And then it was handed out. And guess what? We're still being handed that same bread today. He's still the living bread. He's still being dispersed throughout the nations. We're still breaking the word, right? So the answer today is don't send them away. Don't go back. Let God part the Red Sea. Step out on it if you have to, right? Give him what you have. Let him multiply it. And just sit back and watch what he's going to do. Many of the things we're going through in the natural are parallels to what God's doing in the spiritual. He's breaking the bread. So give him, I encourage you today to give him whatever's in your hand. Even if it looks like it's not enough, even if it looks like it's just a stick, right? Even if it looks like there's no way to make ends meet spiritually, naturally, physically, emotionally, right? Give him what you have. Let him work with it. Let him bless it. And then let him multiply it and expand it. Because I think we're in a time of expansion and multiplicity. But we got to take that first action. Jesus said, bring it to me. Stop thinking about it. They'd already thought about it. They'd already found the answer. They had the answer in their hand. They just didn't know it. They said, send them away so they can go feed themselves. And Jesus said, you feed them. And they were like, well, we don't have the capacity to feed all these people. All we have are 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And Jesus said, bring it to me. That's where we are right now. We've already surveyed what we've got. I don't have anything. That's a good spot to be in. All I have is, and Jesus says, bring it to me. Just like God telling Moses, go forward. Don't stop crying and go forward. Go forward. Bring it to him, and he's going to multiply it. He will disperse it to those hearts who need it right in the moment. Let him take care of it. You're going to be blown away by what God's going to fix to do with you and when you dive into ministry. And just whatever it is before that God has set before you, whether it's a Red Sea or it's 5,000 people you need to feed on just a little kid's lunch, it's okay. God's going to multiply. God's going to do the miraculous. hold on. If you're a minister, hold on. Keep going back to him because he's got the answer. He's going to multiply. Just keep giving it to him. Watch what he's going to do. It's going to be good.